The morning after his trip to his family's lands, Ibarra set out for a visit to Old Tasio's house. The weather was mild, and the peacefulness of the countryside seemed to mirror his thoughts, filled with both hope and uncertainty about his plans. Old Tasio was known to be a strange figure in the town, a man of great learning, yet dismissed by most as mad for his eccentric ways and ideas. Ibarra remembered his late father often consulting the old man, and though many called him crazy, his father always spoke highly of Tasio's wisdom. When Ibarra arrived at the house, he noticed how still and quiet everything seemed. The garden was beautifully maintained, with vines of ivy climbing up the moss-covered walls. The swallows flew about the eaves of the roof, their movements barely making any sound. Everything felt serene, as if silence itself lived in the house. Ibarra carefully hitched his horse to a post and crossed the garden with deliberate steps, not wanting to disturb the peacefulness. As he approached the door, which was already open, he stepped inside quietly. The first thing he noticed was Old Tasio bent over a table, writing in a large book. The room was filled with shelves of books, plants, and collections of insects. It was the room of a scholar who had dedicated his life to knowledge. Tasio was so focused on his work that he didn't notice Ibarra at first. So Ibarra began to step back, not wanting to intrude. "Ah, you're here?" Old Tasio said, looking up with a strange expression on his face. "I didn't see you come in." "Excuse me," Ibarra said politely. "I didn't want to interrupt. You seem very busy." "Yes, I was writing," replied Tasio, rubbing his eyes. "But it's not urgent. I'm happy for the distraction. Is there something I can help you with?" "A great deal, in fact," Ibarra responded as he walked closer. "But—" His eyes were drawn to the book on Tasio's table, filled with unusual symbols. "Are you deciphering hieroglyphics?" he asked in surprise. Tasio chuckled softly, closing the book. "No, I'm not deciphering them. I'm writing them." "Writing them?" Ibarra asked, confused. "But why? I didn't know you knew Egyptian hieroglyphics." "I don't," said the old man, gesturing for Ibarra to sit down. "But I've studied enough to create a system of writing that mimics hieroglyphics. These symbols are my own creation." "But why write like this?" Ibarra pressed, looking more closely at the pages filled with small drawings of animals, flowers, and geometric shapes. "So that I cannot be read now," Tasio said with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "If I wrote in our usual script, someone might read my thoughts and destroy my work. I'm not writing for this generation, but for future ones. If the people of today could understand my ideas, they'd likely burn this book. But someday, in the future, an intelligent generation will decipher these symbols, and they'll understand that not all of us were asleep in the darkness." Ibarra looked at Tasio with curiosity, wondering if perhaps the townspeople were right. Maybe the old man was a bit mad after all. He skimmed through the pages, finding strange figures: animals, circles, flowers, feet, hands, and other curious shapes. "But if you don't want people to read what you've written, why write at all?" Ibarra asked. "I write because I have to," Tasio said, his tone turning serious. "I write for those who will come after us. The truth is too dangerous for the present generation, but one day people will look back and understand. The mystery of these symbols will protect the ideas until the world is ready for them." Ibarra, intrigued but still a bit confused, continued to look through the pages. "In what language are you writing?" he asked. "In our own, Tagalog," Tasio answered. "It's the language of our people, and it suits my thoughts perfectly." Ibarra raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Hieroglyphics in Tagalog?" "Yes," Tasio confirmed. "The signs work quite well for our language. Our vowels and some of our consonants are similar to those used in ancient Egypt. For example, our vowel O and the Egyptian O are alike, and their symbols for ha and ka match sounds that we don't have in Spanish. Writing in hieroglyphs allows me to be concise, to say exactly what I mean without unnecessary words." Ibarra smiled at the old man's passion for his strange system of writing. As Tasio spoke of his hieroglyphs, he pointed to the swallows flying outside the window. "You see those birds?" Tasio said. "They are my friends from China and Japan. They visit me every year." "How do you know they come from China and Japan?" Ibarra asked. Tasio leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Several years ago, before they flew away for the winter, I tied small pieces of paper to their feet. The notes simply said, 'Philippines,' written in English. For a long time I heard nothing back, but one year they returned with messages. One note was written in Chinese, a greeting from the banks of the Huanghe River. The other note was in Japanese, though I've yet to have it fully translated." Ibarra chuckled. "Your guests from China and Japan, then. Quite the international visitors." Tasio nodded, though his tone shifted to seriousness again. "But enough about that. I suppose you haven't come here to talk about swallows and hieroglyphs. What can I do for you?" Ibarra's mood darkened slightly as he remembered the events of the previous day. "You've heard about what happened yesterday afternoon?" Tasio nodded. "I've heard. Have they caught that poor man yet?" "You mean Elias?" Ibarra asked, surprised. "How do you know about him?" "I saw the muse of the civil guard," Tasio replied, his eyes glinting with irony. "The muse of the civil guard? Who is she?" Ibarra asked, puzzled. Tasio smirked. "The alferez's wife, Doña Consolacion. She's as astute as she is wicked. She heard about the incident with the caiman and immediately guessed that the pilot must be the same man who threw her husband into the mud and attacked Padre Damaso. In her own way, she runs the town. Yesterday, out of spite for you not inviting her to your picnic, she sent soldiers to disrupt your gathering." Ibarra sighed, already frustrated by the tangled web of politics in the town. "I must be careful then." "Indeed," Tasio agreed. "Doña Consolacion is not someone to be underestimated." Ibarra shifted the conversation. "That's not the only reason I came here. I came to ask for your advice. My father often sought your counsel, and I've always believed in your wisdom. I have a plan, an important project I'm working on." He paused, taking a set of documents out of his pocket and spreading them on the table. "I'm planning to build a school here in San Diego." Tasio's eyes brightened with surprise and admiration. "A school? That has been my dream for many years, though I feared it would never come to pass." "You are a brave young man, Ibarra. I want this school to be a place where young people can learn, where they can grow and prepare for the future," Ibarra explained, pointing to the architectural plans that had been drawn up in Manila. "But I'm new here. I don't know the people as well as you do. I need to know who I should approach, who I need to convince to support this project." Tasio studied the plans, tears welling in his eyes. "This is wonderful, truly wonderful. But my first piece of advice, Ibarra, is not to seek advice from me." Ibarra blinked in surprise. "But why?" "Because," Tasio said, shaking his head, "if people know that you've come to me for advice, they'll think you're as mad as I am. They call me a fool, a lunatic, because I don't think the way they do. The sensible people will shun you if they believe you've been influenced by me." Ibarra thought about this for a moment. "But surely you can offer some guidance," he insisted. Tasio smiled. "Of course I can. You should seek the advice of the curate, the gobernadorcillo, and anyone with authority in the town. They will offer you poor advice, stupid even, but the point is not to follow their advice, just to ask for it. Let them think you value their opinions. You don't have to obey, but you must make it appear as though you respect their positions." Ibarra frowned. "That seems like a difficult game to play." "It is," Tasio agreed. "But it's a necessary one. Here, nothing is what it seems. Truth doesn't survive without a disguise." "But shouldn't a worthy project stand on its own?" Ibarra asked. "Shouldn't we aim for honesty and transparency? Why play this game of deception?" Tasio sighed, looking out the window. "Because, Ibarra, nobody loves the naked truth. The school teacher in this town, for example, he has tried to do good for years, but his efforts have only been met with mockery. His idealism has been wasted in this village because the people are not ready for his ideas." The old man's words hung heavily in the air, and Ibarra could feel the weight of what he was saying. "I understand your point," he said quietly. "But isn't there hope? Couldn't the government help? After all, they must want the best for the people." Tasio gave a bitter laugh. "The government? The government sees only what the friars want it to see. The officials believe that without the church's support, everything would collapse. The friars frighten the government with threats of rebellion, and the government keeps the people down with its soldiers. It's a cycle of fear. But still," Ibarra persisted, "I have faith in the people. They'll see that this school is for their own good." Tasio gazed at him with pity. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but don't underestimate the power of the church. If they see your school as a threat, they'll turn the whole town against you. Mothers will refuse to send their children to your school, and your efforts will come to nothing." Ibarra frowned. "I refuse to believe that the situation is that hopeless. Spain and the church can't be enemies of progress." Tasio shook his head. "You're young, Ibarra. Youth sees everything in bright colors, but reality is often much darker. Just be careful." After a long pause, Ibarra stood up. "I'll take your advice," he said. "I'll speak with the curate and the town officials. But I won't forget why I'm doing this, because I love my country, and I want to help it." As Ibarra mounted his horse and rode away, Tasio watched him go with a heavy heart. "Destiny has already begun its work," he muttered to himself. "We can only watch and wait to see what unfolds."